Thank you, Thomas, and thanks, Sebastian, for taking the time. We have a few questions, as Thomas said, selected by or sent in by you guys. But before we jump into that, the first question comes from me, because I was here 5 years ago, and then we were in that building. This wasn't it didn't even exist back then. Yeah. So can you bring us up to speed what happened between then and now?
So a lot of things happened actually. So we built a third building, which is Sellita 3, which you see over there. We have this huge and very beautiful bridge, which brings Sellita 3, connects Sellita 3 to Sellita 2. And also, I mean, the whole company increased massively. We bought Elios, which is a turning part company, and also the employee number went up from around 550 to over 800. So we had quite a massive increase also in the production volumes. So we are over 1.2 million movement a year, around maybe 1.5, depending on the market situations. But so it's massively changed. We also introduced a new brand to the market for higher end movement called Manufacture IMT, for Advanced Mechanical Technology, which also allows us to offer movements which much more high-end specs and also more customized for certain clients if they have a certain volume. So a lot of things have changed, both on the verticalization, as I said, with Elios, where we can do our own turning pads in-house. Before we had a lot of other companies, but now it's in addition to all the ones we already own.
So the first few questions came from YouTube, and the very first one comes from Rodrigo Gutierrez Reyes, who says, are you working on any new movements to be developed or new materials to be incorporated into existing movements to make them more attractive to buyers and compete with other manufacturers? I guess you kind of answered this question.
So we release actually movement on a very regular basis, but people maybe do not always see that it comes from us or don't realize. But just this year we just released the different new GMTs on the chronograph, like also with half-time zone indication, so you can also switch from half-time zone to half-time zone. Or we have also classical GMT on chronograph. We have just released also fully new chronograph movement, which is column wheel and flyback. So it's a fully new development with 62 hours power reserve, because we'll probably also address the question of power reserve later on. So we are actually launching movements quite on a regular base, but people don't always take note of it because they know the classics, they know the big ones, the ones we do in high volumes. But we also have in addition to the core range, with very interesting smaller and medium complications, also like a lot of moon phases with calendar, without, and so a lot of small little things. We also offer like a regulator layout and a specific automatic, which has been developed to be a regulator. So it's very thin, very slim. But so we are releasing, I would say, 3 or 4 new calibers a year.
Next question, Gabriel Ross. Independent hour setting should be a standard, in his opinion. Yeah. Just like the quick date setting in most movements. Is it too costly or too technically complex to implement that?
That's a very good question. Also a debate we have internally, because of course we have developed one. The question is more, is there a market or not? Just to maybe let's open a little bit the discussion. First of all, I mean, the GMT, as you know, is one of our core complications. We sell a lot of these. I just mentioned the chronograph GMTs, which are a novelty. But of course, we have a 3-hand GMT called the SV330, which is a classic and which we sell in very high volumes, because GMTs are extremely popular, especially for the last 2 or 3 years, I would say. And so there's still a very high demand for the traditional GMT. And of course, what we call the home time, where you have independent setting, like you have it from Omega or Rolex, is also a discussion. But I'm not so sure it is going to become a classic, because I mean, it's very practical when you travel. You can set back and forth by increments of 1 hour, of course. But if you don't travel and you just want to set your date because you have left your watch in a drawer for a few days, you need to make twice dial around with your hands to change a date. So some people like it, some don't. So the home time makes sense as a modern GMT, like the GMT from people traveling and not people staying at home and needing a second time zone from someone else, but who wants to travel and they want their date and everything to move with them when they set the hand. So there I see a real market. I mean, obviously it exists. Rolex does it, and Tudor, and everyone has one. But I'm not so sure that it could be comparable with a date quick setting, because if you choose to have the independent incremental, you lose the quick setting of the date. And I'm not so sure in a daily use if it's more practical to have. Personally, I don't like it if I want to set my date that I have to make 24 around the dial with my hands.
So it's sacrifice one for the other.
Yes, because basically it's not, you cannot have both.
Yeah.
Technically, one excludes the other one. On the technical side, of course, it's not easy. I mean, it is, but it's not more complicated than GMT. It's just a different syncing, because the date is connected to the GMT and not to the main hours, and so you invert the display basically. Yeah. But where it is maybe technically difficult is if you just want it on every movement without having the premium of a GMT price. And so, of course, you have additional parts, you have more complexity, so basically the movement will be a little bit more expensive. But it's less for us, it's not a technical question, it's really, is there a market?
Yeah, I guess it's probably as you said, they will not sacrifice the quick date.
That's the thing. And some brands, as you also know, have sacrificed the quick date, and I do own a few of these, and honestly, I'm a little bit upset each time I have to set the date because I have no GMT indication, but I still have to so I find date setting not really pleasant. Right. But again, combined with the GMT, it makes fully sense. And there's a future also, I think, within Sellita.
Next question comes from Joshua Kuntz. What is Sellita doing to keep up with the competitors offering anti-magnetic movements? Will they incorporate silicon hairsprings and or other non-ferrous materials? I
mean, they do already incorporate a lot of non-ferrous materials, so we're working on a daily basis to increase and improve all these aspects. So it's not something we talk a lot about it, but we, of course, our movement are evolving like permanently, like really on a very regular basis. So yes, of course, we go in this direction for the whole industry. Again, also our movements have still to be in a certain scope price-wise. So with IMT, we are much more freedom because the movements are quite more expensive. But within the range of Sellita, without increasing the price, which is one of the most important topics for the industry, is that we keep like very entry price level movements too, that we have mass market possibilities. But still, within the scope, we do improve massively. Silicon is, of course, also a big topic for ours. But it's not also, but silicon is not such an easy one because it makes also repairs much more difficult. Meaning you really need specific tools. You cannot touch silicon basically because it is brittle. So you need to have aspiration. So also we have a lot of smaller clients which are not really equipped to handle silicon properly. But of course we do a lot of research in these, and you will see in a form or another silicon in our movements. But I wouldn't say that's the only possible future, because silicon has a lot of advantages, but you can also achieve same of them with other materials, especially non-ferrous, or when you go with Liga production types of nickel phosphorus components, which have the same kind of qualities, but which are much more solid and which are much easier to service all around the world. Because one of the beauty of Sellita is that any watchmaker in the world can freely order parts from our movements and repair wherever he wants. So we really don't try to have any control on who is able or not to repair our movements. Mm-hmm. So of course, if you go onto silicon and very specific materials, it limits the people who have the technical capacities to service your watches. So
do you think that eventually silicon will phase out from the industry in like 10, 15, 20 years?
I think, first of all, it will lose the kind of a magic moment, and I think also the traditional watchmaking isn't found of silicon because it's not repairable, because a watchmaker cannot bend the part, basically he's just not allowed to touch it. And a traditional watchmaker, if you have a hairspring, for instance, you can modify a lot to make it happen, and with the silicon you just have to take it the way it is. So I think silicon will stay, it's here to stay, but I think we will see much more alternative material like titanium-based hairsprings and alloys, which have the same anti-magnetic properties, but which are more traditional, probably, yes.
Okay, move on to NJG, who asks, before I worked among watchmakers, I thought of ETA and Sellita as equal quality, finishing, etc. But apparently they're a little rough, Sellita that is. Does Sellita plan to increase the level of finishing?
That's a very good question. And we are actually 100% identical to ETA, meaning you can basically order whatever you want from us. Meaning it's not up to us to decide what our clients want to buy. So we have a lot of different level of executions. I mean, we have 4 standard ones, which we call D1, D2, D3, D4, which can be seen on our internet site, and you can see the different levels. So we have super high-end finishing, but we also have a rough execution, which has, of course, a different impact on the price. So it's not that our movement are more rough or not. It might be that historically speaking, some of our clients had a tendency to order more rough movement because they wanted to have it the most affordable ones. But we really decorate exactly like ETA. It just depends on what people want to spend and want to order.
The next one is from a user called CDB, and he asks it's a pretty complex question, but he says, what patents or innovations have they made in their history? So I guess there's loads of them. So I would say just pick one or two that you think signifies the brand the most.
Yeah, so of course, as you know, Sellita is 70 years old, so of course having a history of patents would be a little bit long, but what's interesting to know first of all is that we both invest, of course, in the product, but we invest and innovate also a lot in the means of production. So when we talk innovation patents, it can be a machinery, it can be a process of production. It's not meant to be the movement itself. To talk about a very actual patent, which is very important for us because it's just used in the new chronograph we released. So we released a flyback column wheel chronograph, and we added something very unique in the industry, which hasn't been done before. It's why it's patented actually, and it allows you, once the movement has already been put into the case and all the hands on, you just have to open the back and you can regulate the smoothness of the chronograph hand moving.
The watchmaker.
It's a watchmaker, of course. Yeah, so the consumer is not supposed to open the back, but for the watchmaker it's super practical because everything is assembled. He sees a final result. He might think that the hand is a little bit jiggering or is not smooth enough because it's always a little bit of a problem with mechanical chronographs, that how the hand is moving. And of course, the smoother it goes, the more energy it needs. So you need to find a fine-tuning between smoothness and energy consumption. And so we developed a system without, you just have to open the back, of course, to access the movement, but you can let the hand in place, also the dial, and you just can set plus or minus, and you can also adjust to like even personal taste of any customer. And this was something which was also a problem which is known in old chronographs, which we finally solved. And so it's something, for instance, we're very proud of, and which is very actual because we just released this movement a few months back.
Okay, so the next question comes from Magnum Punch, and he asks, do they have proprietary patents and calibers? I know them from the ETA copies.
Yeah, so just let's start maybe a little with the historical background. Yeah. So Sellita was founded in 1950, so it's a company which is over 70 years old now. And our business for 50 years was to buy ébauche, so kits from ETA, to make movements out of these and to sell them to our clients. So we were always related by...
At the time when ETA allowed...
Exactly, because ETA at the time wasn't doing own movements. They were only making kits. Mm-hmm. Because at the time, ETA was not a movement producer, it was a kits producer. It's a huge difference, only spare parts, which has to be put together.
Exactly, so explain what's the difference between a kit and a movement for those of...
So the kit is really when it's unassembled and you have a lot of work to do. You have to put an escapement in, you have to put some rubies in, or you have to do a lot of operations before it can be assembled and be sold as a movement.
A bunch of parts basically.
Absolutely,
in a set.
And in history, we always had this kind of traditional work sharing. Mm-hmm. So everybody did a specific job, and we were a company which was specialized in assembling and selling afterwards movements. Mm-hmm. So we bought the components and main components from ETA and other one from sub-suppliers. We made movements out of it. Sometimes we even asked ETA to develop certain specific kits for us to fit the demand of our clients. So then we assembled these and they were sold by Sellita to a lot of brands. So it's where we started. It's what we did for 50 years. And at a certain point of time, in around 2000, Swatch Group decided to stop this delivery to basically change the way the industry has been functioning for over 200 years. And they decided that ETA should become a movement producer, which it was not.
Were you the biggest client of ETA?
We were the biggest client at the time.
So they kind of basically cut one of their core businesses, selling this huge amount of kits to you to become a movement manufacturer.
Absolutely. So,
okay. Yeah. And then you were left without the business, so to speak. Yes,
but we still had the clients, and we still had the demand, and the demand was still there. So what we did, and because also it was suggested to us also by Mr. Hayek, not that we needed someone to suggest it to us, but we, as these movements were 40 years on plus all, there were no patents or something. So we decided to produce our own kits and to be able to assemble them like we used to do. So we kept all the industry we had, we just were making the kits ourselves, and it's how we became a fully fledged movement manufacturer. So we started by doing ETA movements, and afterwards we did movements which are pretty technically very close or quite similar, and now we have evolved to be doing movement of our own. So we have a very long evolution from someone where we're making assembling kits and selling these movements to someone doing his fully own movements with his own design and own patterns and own drawings.
But really the evolution, that, as you said, it was a long evolution, but it was actually quite amazing what you were forced into.
Yes.
In 2000, and how or where you are now in 2022, so 20 years later, right?
Because yes, and a lot of people thought we would never manage to do it.
Right.
So a lot of people were skeptical. At the time, we were 120 people. Yeah. When Miguel took over, and I know we are over 800.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the business is not good.
No. So it's, I mean, but of course there were a lot of challenges on the way. They had a lot to fight for innovation, for quality, for investment, a lot. So it wasn't, nowadays it looks all very nice and superb afterwards, but at the time I was still an outsider. I didn't work at the time for Sellita, unfortunately. And a lot of people were very skeptical if Sellita could transform itself from being someone who bought kits to someone, a fully fledged manufacturer. I mean, no, we proved people to be wrong because it's running and existing. But it was not so obvious at the time. And other people tried in the industry, a lot of people tried to become an alternative to ETA and failed, basically. So it is a tricky business.
This question from Aiden Vassallo says, are they going to compete with ETA on upping the power reserve of their movements or some of the in-house movements with the long service intervals?
Of course, I mean, we already did for most of our movements, like the SV300 is now 56 hours instead of 42. Our chronograph, all the range is 62 hours when it's automatic and 63. So we are far away from the 40 hours originally, so 63 when it's handwound. Also, as the SV200 has been increased to 42, it's still not much, but it's still 10% more than it used to be. And all the new generation movement we are working on, and which also some have been released, but are reserved to certain clients, are 80 or up. So we go between 80 and 8 days nowadays in our very new movement. But again, some are also made specific for clients, so they're not in the catalogs, they're not freely available. But of course, everything we develop new nowadays is 60 plus minimum, but in general it's more between 72 and 100 hours. And we do also plan a very large volume caliber, which will replace on the long run the SV200, which would be at least 65 hours as a standard.
As a standard?
As a standard.
Wow. Next one, Robert Marshall says or asks, what's the average lifespan of a movement used daily? I guess that's a general question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we are still at an average of 5 years of daily wear when you need to service it. We are all striving to go to 10 years, so we have a lot of things going on at Sellita where we probably in our movement logically could be serviced every 10 years more or less, but we still suggest to every 5 years to be on the safe side. And once you service, basically your movement is eternal in a way that if it's properly serviced every 5 years, I mean your movement, your watch will still be alive or still be functional in 50 years. So there's not really a lifespan, it's more like a service interval. And if the service is done properly, you have no lifespan. I mean, a watch can be serviced eternally, a mechanical watch. That's all the beauty about it. As long as you get spare parts, you can always fix it.
Yeah, but that's the point I wanted to say. Like, if you look at vintage watches, obviously, they are eternal so long as you have the parts for the in-house vintage.
But that's one of the big advantages of big manufacturers like Sellita. It is not like a very strange movement made somewhere in the basement of someone you don't know. It's made at such a volumes that the change are very high that even in 100 years you will find spare parts. Right. Hopefully.
The next question comes from Nemo Omen, and this user asks, how are you responding to the Chinese clone wars?
So first of all, I think we are not responding directly, as we are in our own Swiss-made universe where quality comes first. So it's not we're not competing in a way of the product might look the same, but technically speaking, it's not because we don't take any shortcuts in quality or whatsoever. But it's interesting, of course, because I mean, industry exists outside of Switzerland, so of course, the Chinese industry is strong also. I think it serves different needs and different kind of clients and watch brands. I think what is more problematic from our side is like we are really defending Swiss-made very strongly first of all being ourselves in Switzerland, but working around with all the best Swiss suppliers. So not only the 800 people working for Sellita Group are in Switzerland, or a few in Germany, but all the rest are in Switzerland, but all our suppliers in Switzerland. And of course, some Swiss companies who are not access to movements might be tempted to buy some components or clones in China and make what we call fake Swiss made out of it. And that gets a problem because obviously it dilutes the Swissness. And we are, of course, defending Swiss made. And we do have to defend it because it's a know-how, it's a tradition, and it's a real difference in quality. So, I mean, as long as it is just a copy and targeting certain kind of Asiatic brands, it's not an issue.
This is not trying to be
something
something else that it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then as long as some brands try to take shortcuts, like making Swiss things which do not really comply with Swiss regulation, that's getting problematic. Yeah.
Interesting question. And so is the next one from G-Motion EDC. Where will watchmakers come from in 50 years?
That's a good question. Are we talking watchmakers or watchmaking? As hopefully
Watchmakers.
Watchmakers, hopefully Switzerland. I mean, as not like that they have to be Swiss from nationality, because as you know, some very famous Swiss watchmakers, or probably even the most famous nowadays, like Kari Voutilainen or Vianney Alter or Journe,
back then
are not really Swiss, but the strength of Switzerland, and we see it also with Miguel Garcia, the owner and CEO of Sellita, is we attract people from all around the world, but we still defend the Swiss made. I mean, it's not because you can be German, you can be Swiss, you can be Italian or Spanish whatsoever. You come to Switzerland and we all fight for the same kind of quality, right? And so hopefully for us, as we work in the Swiss made industry, we will still be relevant as a Swiss industry, and we will have defended our values, which are, I think, which have been long lasting, and hopefully will also be relevant in the future, meaning high quality products with outstanding design, with very, very strong brand recognition, and something people like to wear, despite the fact that obviously technology speaking, they are all obsolete, right? But you still have the pleasure of wearing something unique on your wrist, and also I think with the way we produce them, it is still very modern, because we do things which are not meant to be wasted in a few months. Right. So we also not tend to follow every fashion. We have fashions, of course, but I mean, you are wearing a superb Omega Speedmaster. It has never been out of fashion, and it will probably never be. And I think as long as we manage to stay relevant as a Swiss industry, I think we, hopefully in 50 years, we will still be there.
So the last question from YouTube user comes from Drewski5150, who asks, are Sellita planning to release an SW200-2 with a stronger teeth on its ratchet wheel to match the quality of an ETA 2824-2?
I mean, we solved this issue over 10 years ago, so it's quite a historically interesting question. It was basically also not about the quality of the material, it was the geometry of the teeth, which in certain circumstances had too much torque on it, which could put it to break. But this is something which has been solved 10 or 12 years ago. But already some people remember. But no, I mean, we are really on par. I mean, you have to see, we make maybe 800,000 of these movements used by all big brands. I mean, we are really on par with comparable movement on the market. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such a huge demand and such a huge customer base for these movements. Yeah.
So that's it for YouTube, but we have a few more from Instagram. Some of the users sent in some questions from Instagram. And here's the first one from Mattis146 on Instagram. Is there any likely caliber innovation on the horizon, and if so, what it is?
So yeah, I mean, as I said before, we do a lot of innovation every year. That's why we have a catalog with over 120 pages of different movements, right? So I mean, people, most of them know maybe 3 of them, but they don't really know what we do offer. And we have a very wide range, going from a simple 3-hand for ladies' watches up to a super complicated chronograph with flyback and the GMT and time, day and night indication and a different other complications. So we do a lot of additional complications, and of course we do core innovation with fully new automatic movements. Like we presented the new flyback chronograph, and we will release a fully new automatic in the next 2 years. So we have different innovation on different levels, meaning from a small complication up to a fully new movement. But I think most people still don't really know what we do. Even so, the catalog and our movement are freely available on internet. So maybe some of our people here might have a look and see what's already existing.
Okay, next question. The_Wong_watch asks, will we be seeing Sellita's own branded watch coming soon?
Never, ever. I mean, it's a core. I mean, one of the pillars of our industry, of our business model, is to serve brands and not to compete with brands. You cannot be on both sides. You have to decide what you want to be. And we decided 70 years ago that we wanted to be a movement supplier. And it's very important. We are very much involved with our clients in new developments and how the future might look like. It's unthinkable of to be competing with the same people you want to supply movements to.
And you don't really see it often, right? You don't see other manufacturers.
I mean, the only one who did it in the past was Swatch Group, and they decided to stop delivery and to focus on their own brands. Yeah.
Next question, C. Nagy. Is there a time coming when the SW200-1 will have a longer power reserve?
The time is coming, and it will just not be the SV200. It will be something replacing it, basically. But yes, the time will come sooner than later. Yes.
Sooner than later. Okay. Another question came from Gilmiuas. Do you think we'll see any big patterns or other big changes from what we are used to in a standard movement? I'm guessing he or she is asking in general.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, the thing is, basically, we do steam machines in a way. I mean, if you innovate too much, basically you lose or you left the mechanical field, right? Yeah. Also, we had a lot of discussion with new escapement, where we replaced basically the traditional hairspring, with very, very high frequency. But at the end of the day, it has a bit. It has a charm of something different, but it is not what we call traditional watchmaking with a beat. You lose the traditional beat, you lose the sound, you lose the feeling. So the question is, do you really want to change? I sometimes with my engineer we're kidding. I said, don't go too far, otherwise you make a quartz watch or you invent something like electronical, or in a way we are still in a field where it has to be something made by parts, made by humans, something you can repair, something you can look at. It has to look beautiful. And of course, with all the new technologies around, you can be more precise. But the idea is more to keep it how it is and make it with better materials, with longer service intervals. But we are not really interested in changing the core of how it works.
You don't want to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Not really, because otherwise you do an accutron or you do something different. And I'm personally very interested in all the new oscillating. You see also very, very good companies like Flexus doing very interesting stuff, but you leave the field of traditional watchmaking.
So, last question. Nicola Oberli from Instagram. What are the next Good question. What are the next challenges? Lower prices, thinner movements, more precise movements, complications?
I think all of them. Basically, our clients always want a more affordable movement. I think it will be difficult because we want to improve every day the quality and the kind of material we use. We recycle more and more. And the way we produce has to be sustainable. We invest a lot in sustainability also here in the company. But now we are working. All these topics are something we work on it on a daily basis. I would say also in the development team with my development team. In the sense we need new complications. We need also to make the existing one more reliable and easy to use. And of course we also working on thinner movements. But again, it pretty much depends on where you want to use it. If you have a diving watch, it's not thinness which is interesting for you. It has to be sturdy and has to withstand it has to be really a strong movement, and the size is not really matter. But I mean, depending on our different clients, all the things you said or the question asked are relevant, definitively. And some exclude, obviously, the others. I mean, for instance, the thinner a movement is, the more expensive it gets, because the tolerances has to be. Otherwise, a wheel which has to be so a few microns away from another one is more expensive to make than a one which can have a lot of play and have a mile between two wheels, right? So you cannot have ultra slim and lower the price and sustainability and everything. No, that's not possible. But we have more and more different categories at Sellita, where we also we have different demand, and we answer these different demands with different products.
In one of your answers, you mentioned AMT, but we don't really know what AMT is. We haven't really talked about this. Can you give us a bit of background on what that means?
With great pleasure. So AMT, Manufacture AMT for Advanced Mechanical Technology, is our new movement brand, so to speak, where we go in a higher level. So it's a different market.
Is it higher than the highest Sellita offers?
Yes, absolutely. It starts basically where Sellita stops, and also it is a company, because it's not only a name, it's also a company where we also do a lot of special projects for bigger companies, where we are able to develop specific complications, which really are fitting the DNA of our different clients, up to a fully new movement, which of course will be reserved to certain clients. And in addition to all these possibilities, from small complication dedicated to a certain client to fully new movement dedicated to certain brands, we also have a little range of movements, branded EMT, which are available to all clients, which are not like reserved. And we really had the need to develop EMT because the industry is evolving constantly, and there is a real market between standard movements and all in-house in a way, because we are very good obviously at making movements. So a lot of brands realize that it might make more sense to come to specialized people who make 1.5 million movement a year and say, we need something super special, super high-end, best quality possible, and which is our own. And this is a bit where the industry is going. And it's always been basically Patek bought movement from Lecoultre or from Valjoux for the chronographs, and we are going back to that, where big brands also need some movement specialists, and Sellita, with all the engineering power and the production facilities, now opened to this new segment.
So if I'm a big client, can I come to you and say, I want a movement that's such and such and such and such, and develop it for me, if you don't have it already in your AMT catalog?
That's the idea.
And if, for example, a big client comes and orders a movement, you design it and you also produce it, or you can only just design it and then they will produce it themselves?
No,
work as an agency technically.
We could basically do, and we are very open to all kind of collaboration. So it's always a little bit of a mix, but basically the base model is we have the technology and we have the production facility. So we make both, but of course with all the industry very integrated, with some also will be produced partly themselves. But the core idea is we develop and we produce. But of course you always have mixed. It depends on every topic. But we are really a producer, so yeah. So we also tend to develop to produce afterwards.
So that was all the questions that we had for you. Thanks a lot for your time, and
thanks for your interest.
No, of course, and hopefully we will be back soon with some more questions. But this video is over, but we will not finish talking, because we're going to do something else, talking about you and your watches and from your collection, which is something very special. I know that for a fact. So stay tuned for the next video with Sebastian and me, a bit of watch talk about the teeny tiny bit of your collection. Thanks for watching and enjoy your watches.